Welcome to the Morning English Podcast. Listen, learn, and speak English daily.
Have you ever had that experience where you decide you're going to completely master something new?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you get incredibly motivated, you buy all the books, you download the
They
software.
watch like hours of tutorial videos.
Exactly, hours of them. And you sit there in your room, just entirely isolated, studying the theory, looking at the diagrams, and in your head, you feel like an absolute prodigy.
You think you've got it all figured out.
You do. You understand the mechanics flawlessly on paper, but then the inevitable happens.
You actually do.
You have to step out into the physical world and perform the task in real time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's hitting a golf ball, or maybe it's writing a line of code without an autocompleter, or, maybe it's speaking a new language. And what happens? You just, you completely and utterly freeze.
It's a staggering reality check, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, that sudden paralysis, you have all this data stored in your prefrontal cortex, and yet your body or your mouth simply refuses to execute.
It's like a disconnect.
Completely. We operate under this very logical, but honestly completely flawed assumption that if we just hold enough raw data in our minds, the real-time application of that data will just naturally follow.
Like downloading a file.
Right. We treat the human brain like a computer hard drive. But moving from passive intellectual understanding to active, real-time physical execution, it requires an entirely different set of neurological pathways.
The transition isn't automatic.
No, not at all. It actually requires a bridge that, frankly, most people never bothered to build.
And that missing bridge is exactly what we are dissecting today. Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a stack of excerpts from a text called Foundations of Daily English Conversation Practice.
Which is a fascinating document.
It is. Now, I know what you might be thinking listening to this. If you already speak English fluently, or if you aren't currently trying to learn a new language, why are we looking at a beginner's language guide?
That's a fair question.
I had the exact same reaction when we first pulled this source material. I thought, okay, this is going to have a dry list of vocabulary words and grammar rules.
Which is the standard format for almost every language textbook on the market, honestly.
Yeah.
But reading through these foundations, it becomes clear very quickly that this isn't just about English. The author is actually outlining a highly sophisticated sequential framework for skill acquisition.
Yes.
It just happens to be using the English language as its primary vehicle.
It's a blueprint.
Exactly. The psychological barriers, it addresses things like the paralyzing fear of looking foolish, the inefficiency of binge studying, the cognitive friction of real-time processing. These are universal bottlenecks.
Whether you're trying to learn conversational Spanish or master a martial art or just learn how to public speak.
The mechanics of getting over your own ego and forcing your brain to adapt to a new active skill are exactly the same across the board.
So, the mission for this deep dive is to look past the literal vocabulary lessons here and extract the underlying psychology. We need to figure out why the simple act of opening your mouth to speak is so much more cognitively demanding than reading a page of text.
Right.
And we're going to examine why the author insists that practicing wildly mundane phrases like, talking about brushing your teeth is actually a clinical tool for hacking your brain's retrieval system.
We essentially want to decode the architecture of fluency.
I like that, the architecture of fluency.
Not just linguistic fluency, but behavioral fluency. How do you take a complex, highly intimidating endeavor and chop it down into such microscopic, non-threatening steps that your brain doesn't trigger a stress response?
Let's start right there with that stress response. Because the text introduces a concept early on that I'm going to loosely call the hesitation gap.
That's a great term for it.
The author makes this very pointed observation about beginners. They note that a student can often read a passage of English perfectly. They can sit in a cafe, listen to a native speaker, and comprehend almost everything being said.
Yes, their comprehension is high.
But the second that same student is prompted to reply, there's this agonizing pause. They freeze. And frankly, this seems kind of counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, if the vocabulary is already in their head, if they just prove they know the words by understanding the person speaking to them, why can't they just say the words back?
Because you're conflating two fundamentally different cognitive processes.
Okay, break that down for me.
The author is very careful to distinguish between passive absorption and active generation. When you are reading or listening, you are engaging in passive skills. The information is being fed to you.
Right.
Your brain gets to sit back and decode that information at a relatively comfortable pace. If you're reading, you can pause, you can reread a sentence or use context clues. There's zero external pressure.
You're in control of the timeline.
Exactly. But speaking is a highly active, concurrent processing event.
Wait, concurrent processing, meaning the brain is doing multiple heavy lifting tasks at the exact same millisecond.
Precisely. To speak, you have to first ideate the thought. Then you have to sift through your mental database to retrieve the correct vocabulary.
Which takes time.
Yes. Then you have to organize those words using the correct syntactical rules. And then, and this is a part people always forget, you have to send complex motor commands to your diaphragm, your vocal cords, your tongue, and your lips to physically produce the sounds.
Physical.
It's highly physical. And on top of all that, you are actively monitoring the facial expressions of the person you're talking to, adjusting your tone based on their reactions.
That is a lot.
It is a massive multi-lane highway of cognitive load. So when the learner hesitates, it's not because they don't know the word apple.
Right.
It's because their processing system is redlining. It's overwhelmed by the real-time coordination of all those different tasks.
So the hesitation is basically the brain's buffering symbol.
That is exactly what it is.
It's a hardware limitation, not a software limitation. You have the software, you know, the vocabulary, but your RAM is completely maxed out.
Spot on.
And that leads directly to a massive trap that the text highlights. The author points out that when learners hit this hesitation gap, their immediate instinct is to retreat back to the books.
Yes, the comfort zone.
They think, I froze because I don't know enough grammar. If I just memorize 20 more irregular verbs or study the past perfect continuous tense for another hour, I won't hesitate next time.
It's a completely logical self-diagnosis, but as the text argues, it's entirely wrong.
Completely backwards.
The author emphasizes that a language becomes strong through use, not just through isolated study. Going back to your computer analogy, memorizing more grammar rules is just stuffing more files into a deeply buried folder on your hard drive.
It doesn't upgrade your RAM.
It doesn't improve your processor speed at all. When you're standing face-to-face with a native speaker, having an encyclopedic knowledge of grammar rules won't help you if you haven't built the neural pathways required for rapid retrieval.
I see what you're saying, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If you don't aggressively study the grammar and the rules, isn't your spoken language just going to be a chaotic mess of disconnected words? You need the foundation, don't you?
You need a basic framework, absolutely. But the text isn't saying grammar is useless. It's warning against using grammar study as an avoidance tactic.
Using it to hide.
Exactly. People retreat to grammar books because reading a book is safe. You can't be embarrassed by a book. You can't stutter in front of a book.
The book doesn't judge you.
It doesn't. The author is pushing the learner to realize that the chaos, the messiness, the stuttering, that isn't a sign that you need more book study. That messy execution is the actual learning process.
Which brings us to what I genuinely think is the most clarifying analogy in the entire source material.
The bicycle.
Yes, the bicycle. The text compares this whole dynamic to learning how to ride a bicycle. The author writes, "You cannot learn only by reading instructions. You must practice again and again."
It's a perfect metaphor.
I want to really sit with this image for a second. Imagine you decide you want to learn how to ride a bike, but you refuse to actually get on one.
Right.
Instead, you sit on your couch and read a dense 400-page manual on the physics of cycling. You memorize the vector forces. You understand the gyroscopic effect of the wheels. You calculate the exact coefficient of friction required for the rubber tires to grip the asphalt.
Theoretically, you are an absolute master of the bicycle. You could ace a written university exam on the mechanics of cycling.
Right. But the moment you walk outside, throw your leg over the saddle and lift your feet off the pavement, what's going to happen?
You crash.
You're going to immediately crash into the nearest mailbox. All that theoretical physics knowledge is instantly rendered useless.
Because your body doesn't know what balance feels like. Your inner ear hasn't experienced the specific sensation of tipping to the left and needing to compensate by shifting your weight to the right. Your nervous system hasn't mapped the micro adjustments required in your core muscles.
The physical mapping is missing.
The source material is using this analogy to point out a harsh truth about language. Speaking is profoundly physical. It is a motor skill as much as it is an intellectual one. When the author insists that speaking every day trains your brain to respond naturally, they are talking about building muscle memory.
You are literally pedaling the bike. The words on the page are the physics manual, Actually vibrating your vocal cords and moving your jaw to produce the sound in real time is pedaling the bike.
And if you never pedal, you're never going to ride.
It doesn't matter how vast your vocabulary is. But that leaves us with a massive practical problem.
Which is?
Well, if we know we have to get on the bike and pedal, where do we actually begin? You can't just jump into a high-stakes, hour-long debate about macroeconomics on day one.
Oh no, that would be a disaster.
You'll crash instantly, your confidence will be shattered, and you'll never try again.
Which is exactly why the text pivots into a very systematic, incremental approach. If you throw a beginner into the deep end, their amygdala, the fear center of the brain, hijacks the entire process.
They go into fight or flight mode.
Completely. So the author constructs what we can think of as conversational stepping stones. The goal here is to artificially lower the stakes so significantly that the fear of failure is almost completely neutralized. You have to manufacture early wins.
And the very first stepping stone the text lays out seems almost comically simple.
Oh.
It suggests starting with basic greetings.
Right.
It lists examples like saying good morning, good afternoon, or answering how are you with I am fine or I'm doing well. Now, I'll be honest, reading this, it feels almost too basic to even warrant inclusion. We are talking about the absolute lowest common denominator of human interaction. What is the actual psychological utility of focusing on good morning?
Think back to the cognitive load we discussed earlier, the overwhelming RAM required to formulate a sentence. The brilliance of starting with good morning is that it bypasses almost all of that processing.
How so?
It is a pre-packaged fixed phrase. You aren't analyzing sentence structure. You aren't conjugating a verb. You are simply retrieving a single unbroken block of sound and deploying it.
It's essentially a vocal reflex.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a reflex. But here's the crucial part. Even though it's a reflex, it still initiates a complete interpersonal transaction.
Ah.
You deploy the phrase, the person you're speaking to hears it, processes it, smiles, and says, good morning, back. To your nervous system, that is a massive victory.
You communicated.
You have successfully initiated and completed a communication loop in a foreign language. The author relies on these greetings because they are socially predictable and incredibly safe. That small dopamine hit of success begins to chip away at the hesitation gap.
It proves to the brain that speaking this new language doesn't have to result in a catastrophic failure. It's like balancing on the bicycle for exactly 1 second before putting your foot down. It's not a Tour de France stage, but it proves the physics work.
That's a great way to look at it.
Now, from greetings, the text moves into an area that I find endlessly fascinating because it seems so incredibly boring on the surface. The power of the mundane.
The daily routines.
Yes. The author strongly recommends that learners immediately start talking about the most basic routines of their daily life. The examples given are things like answering, "What did you do today?" with, "I went to work," or "I stayed at home."
This is a very deliberate escalation in difficulty. You are transitioning away from prepackaged reflexes like good morning and moving into active sentence construction.
But keeping it safe.
Exactly. You are doing it within the safest possible parameters. When you say, I went to work, you have to select a pronoun, retrieve a past tense verb, and attach a destination. You are actively building the architecture of a thought, but because the subject matter is so deeply familiar to you, the cognitive strain is minimized.
And the text pushes this focus on the mundane even further by highlighting morning routines. It literally suggests practicing phrases out loud like, I wake up at 7 in the morning, I brush my teeth, I take a shower, and I eat breakfast.
Yes.
Look, nobody wants to have a conversation about brushing their teeth. It's not insightful, it's not charming. Why is the author insisting that an adult learner spend time reciting the actions of a toddler?
Because fluency isn't about your ability to deploy rare, esoteric vocabulary. True fluency is the ability to instantly and effortlessly retrieve the most common, high-frequency words in human existence.
The bedrock words.
Right. By reciting, I brush my teeth or I take a shower, the learner is forcing their brain to repeatedly fire the neural circuits associated with core physical actions. The author is using the sheer repetitiveness of a morning routine as a built-in training mechanism.
Because you do it every day?
You brush your teeth every single day. If you practice saying the phrase while you do it, you are anchoring the abstract vocabulary to a highly specific daily physical reality.
It's like a musician practicing scales.
That's exactly it.
A concert pianist doesn't walk out on stage at Carnegie Hall and just play a C major scale for the audience. But they practice that scale 10,000 times in their living room so that when they are performing a complex concerto, Their fingers instinctively know the topography of the keyboard.
Saying, "I take a shower," is playing the linguistic scale.
And speaking of daily routines, the text leans heavily into another universal topic: food. It points out that everyone can talk about meals easily. It suggests practicing sentences like, "I ate eggs and toast," "I had cereal," or "I drank coffee."
And again, while the topic seems trivial, look closely at the grammatical machinery hidden inside those simple sentences.
The irregular verbs.
Yes, the author uses food to smuggle in one of the most notoriously difficult aspects of the English language. Irregular past tense verbs. I ate, I had, I drank.
Because they don't follow the standard rule of just adding an ed to the end of a word.
Exactly. Beginners stumble over irregular verbs constantly.
Because they have to pause and search their memory for the specific exception to the rule.
Precisely. But by tying these difficult verbs to the visceral sensory experience of eating breakfast, the author grounds the abstract grammar. It's no longer a sterile rule printed in a textbook. It becomes intrinsically linked to the smell of the coffee or the taste of the eggs you just consumed.
You are taking a complex grammatical exception and tying it to a biological necessity.
It's a brilliant way to force the brain to categorize the information as vital rather than just trivia.
I love that concept of smuggling the complex grammar inside a safe, familiar topic. It's so smart. As the learner masters these highly internal personal routines, the text begins to expand the perimeter.
Moving outward.
Right. It categorizes what I would call the common pillars of social navigation, starting with work and school. He gives examples of common questions like, "Where do you work?" and scripts simple responses like, "I work in an office," or "I start work at 9 o'clock.
Notice the shift here. We've moved from the private sphere, what I ate when I woke up, into the public sphere. The learner is now practicing how to define their identity and their societal role to a stranger.
Which is usually where social anxiety really kicks in.
It is. Social anxiety usually compounds linguistic anxiety. But the author's strategy here is essentially preloading. In any culture, when you meet someone new, the odds are extraordinarily high that they will ask what you do for a living.
It's guaranteed.
By rigorously practicing these specific responses, the learner is pre-calculating the conversation. When the question inevitably comes up in real life, they don't have to panic and invent a sentence from scratch. They just hit play on the preloaded script.
It drastically reduces the latency in the conversation, which makes the learner feel competent.
Yeah.
And to flesh out that social identity, the text introduces hobbies.
Right, what you do for fun.
It says, hobbies make conversations more interesting because they show what people enjoy doing in their free time. Things like, I like reading books, or I play football. But the crucial detail the text highlights here is that discussing hobbies naturally generates follow-up questions.
This is a major evolutionary leap in the learner's journey.
How so?
Well, up until this point in the text, almost every example has been a one-way declarative statement. I ate this. I work here. It's transactional. But a follow-up question fundamentally alters the dynamic.
Because you don't know what they're going to ask.
Exactly. It requires the learner to actively listen, decode an unscripted inquiry, and formulate a relevant contextual response. The author notes that this keeps the conversation flowing naturally. This is the moment the training wheels start to come off.
You're actually conversing.
The learner is no longer just reciting. They are engaging in a dynamic, unpredictable tennis match of communication.
Hitting the ball back over the net rather than just serving it and walking away. But what happens when you drop the ball? What happens when the rally dies and you're standing there in awkward silence?
The weather.
The weather. The text offers the ultimate conversational life raft. The weather. It is sunny today. The weather is very cold. It is raining outside. It's almost a cliche to talk about the weather when you have nothing else to say, but the author strongly endorses it as a learning tool.
It's a cliche for a reason. The weather is the ultimate shared reality. You don't need to navigate cultural nuances. You don't need to know anything about the other person's background. And there's absolutely zero risk of accidentally wandering into a controversial or offensive topic.
It is entirely neutral ground.
From a linguistic standpoint, the author values weather talk because it forces the learner to practice simple state-of-being descriptions. You are using basic adjectives to describe the current physical environment. It's an incredibly safe sandbox for practicing sentence structure while simultaneously fulfilling the social obligation of keeping the interaction alive.
Okay, so we've established these stepping stones for social bonding. Routines, work, hobbies, the weather. But what if the stakes are higher?
Survival skills.
Yes. What if you aren't just trying to be polite, but you actually need to survive in a new environment? The text categorizes a set of practical survival skills. Starting with shopping, it provides scripts for navigating a store. How much does this cost? Or, do you have this in another color? And it prepares the learner for the responses. It costs $10. Or, yes, we have it in blue.
If we look at the psychological friction of moving to a new country or navigating a foreign environment, these transactional interactions are where the most acute panic occurs.
Oh, absolutely. The anxiety of holding up a line.
Yes. If you mess up a greeting at a party, it's slightly awkward. But if you walk into a market and you physically cannot ask how much a bottle of water costs, or you can't decipher the number the cashier says back to you, your sense of autonomy completely collapses.
You're stuck.
You become fundamentally dependent on others. The text focuses on these specific transactional scripts because mastering them restores the learner's agency. It allows them to procure the basic necessities of life without feeling helpless.
Restoring agency. That is such a powerful way to frame it. You aren't just learning numbers, you are learning how to survive independently. And that maps perfectly onto the next survival skill the text covers, which is asking for directions.
Crucial.
The examples are classic. Where is the nearest bus stop? Or how can I get to the train station? And then bracing for the geographical responses like go straight, turn left, or it is next to the bank.
Navigating physical space in a second language is a profoundly complex cognitive mapping exercise. Think about what is happening in the brain here. You have to vocalize your desired destination, carefully parse the stream of directional vocabulary coming back at you, convert those auditory signals into a three-dimensional mental map, and then translate that map into physical movement through an unfamiliar city.
It's a massive amount of processing.
It is a high-stakes, real-world application of the language. When a learner successfully asks for directions and actually arrives at the train station, it isn't just a linguistic victory, it's a massive psychological triumph. The geographic boundaries of their world literally expand.
I can completely visualize that feeling. The absolute terror of being lost in a strange city, followed by the immense relief of successfully asking a stranger for help and understanding their gestures and words, it completely changes your relationship with the environment.
It does.
Now, as the learner secures this foundation of survival and basic social interaction, the text nudges them to expand their structural complexity. It suggests practicing by describing immediate surroundings, looking around a room and explicitly stating, there is a table near the window, or my bed is next to the wall. Why the focus on furniture placement?
It's an exercise in spatial prepositions. Words like near, next to, on, and under are notoriously slippery for language learners.
They really are. They don't translate one-to-one.
Exactly. Direct translation of prepositions often fails catastrophically between languages because different cultures conceptualize spatial relationships differently. By forcing the learner to sit in a room and verbally label the physical relationships between the objects around them, the author is demanding that they actively observe and map their environment using the new linguistic framework.
So you have to connect the word directly to the spatial reality.
It's a solitary practice, but it's essential for building a robust structural foundation. You are mapping reality to the new vocabulary.
And the final stepping stone in this section asks the learner to make the biggest cognitive leap of all. It pushes them to step entirely out of the present moment and talk about the future.
The future tense.
Right. The text provides examples like, tomorrow I will go to the market, I will meet my friend, or I will study English tonight.
Up until this point, the learner has been locked in the concrete reality of the present. What they see, what they are doing, or the immediate past, like what they just ate. Introducing future plans requires practicing the future tense, which involves a higher level of abstract thinking.
Because it hasn't happened yet.
You are trying to articulate a reality that does not yet exist. However, the author brilliantly tethers this abstract grammar to mundane, highly predictable events like going to the market or studying. They are introducing a complex grammatical concept, but keeping the subject matter completely grounded, preventing the learner from becoming overwhelmed by too many new variables at once.
Okay, so let's take a breath and look at the architecture we've built so far. We've laid out the whats. We know to start with greetings, move to mundane routines like eggs and toast, secure our survival with shopping and directions, and finally expand into future plans.
The content is mapped.
We have the content. But now, as we move into section 3 of our deep dive, the source material pivots dramatically. It stops telling us what to say and starts telling us exactly how to train our brains to say it.
the active techniques.
It introduces the active techniques for daily practice.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, for a text dedicated to speaking, the first major technique it focuses on is listening.
It's a necessary paradox. You cannot accurately produce a sound or a structure that your brain hasn't first thoroughly absorbed. The text states very plainly that listening is a vital component of conversation practice. But it's important to understand the specific type of listening the author is advocating for.
It's not passive.
No, this isn't about throwing on a podcast in the background while you wash the dishes and just hoping the language seeps into your brain through osmosis.
Right. It specifies that when you listen carefully, you understand how sentences are structured and how words are pronounced. It's highly analytical listening.
Exactly. You are listening to decode the architecture of the speech. You are observing the cadence, noticing which syllables are stressed, how native speakers compress certain words together, where they pause for breath.
Building a model.
You are building an auditory template in your mind. The text recommends using English podcasts, conversations, and videos to become familiar with natural speech patterns. This active listening calibrates your brain's expectations so you know what the language is actually supposed to sound like, rather than what a textbook says it sounds like.
It's the difference between reading sheet music and actually listening to a jazz band perform the song. You have to hear the swing of the notes.
That's a great comparison.
But listening alone doesn't fix the hesitation gap. You have to eventually open your mouth. And this is where the text introduces a technique that I find absolutely fascinating. It's a method called shadowing.
Shadowing is arguably the most aggressively active, physically demanding technique in the entire source material. It is the direct bridge between passive absorption and active generation.
For those of you listening who haven't encountered this concept before, the text defines it with brutal simplicity. Shadowing means listening to a sentence and repeating it immediately. That is the entire instruction.
Just do it.
You listen to a native speaker audio track, and a fraction of a second later, you mimic the sounds they are making, speaking almost simultaneously over the track. It sounds chaotic. I tried to imagine doing this, and the cognitive friction seems incredibly high. Why on earth does this parrot-like mimicking work so well?
It works precisely because it forces you to bypass the analytical, translation-obsessed part of your brain. When a beginner reads words on a page, their brain instinctively overlays the rhythm, the intonation, and the vowel sounds of their native language onto those new words.
They bring their own baggage to the words.
They are applying old software to new data. Shadowing violently disrupts that process. Because you are forcing yourself to repeat the audio signal immediately, with only a millisecond delay, you literally do not have the time to stop, analyze the grammar, or think about what the word means in your native tongue.
Your brain is moving too fast to overthink it.
Exactly. You are engaging the pure mimicry centers of your neurological system. You are treating the language entirely as a musical performance, not an intellectual puzzle. The text explicitly points out that this method improves pronunciation, rhythm, and confidence.
Because you're just physically doing it.
You are physically training the muscles of your jaw, your tongue, and your vocal cords to move in unfamiliar patterns, guided in real time by the native speaker's audio. It forces you to abandon your internal native rhythm and adopt the authentic physical cadence of the target language. It's essentially forced immersion for your vocal apparatus.
That concept of bypassing the analytical brain connects perfectly to what I think is the most profound psychological advice in this entire text. If you only take one thing away from this deep dive, let it be this next point.
The translation trap.
The text addresses the single biggest mental roadblock that causes that hesitation gap we talked about at the beginning. I call it the translation trap.
It is the ultimate bottleneck in language acquisition. The source material delivers a very clear directive here. Instead of translating every thought from your native language, try to form simple thoughts directly in English.
Which sounds lovely, but it also sounds impossible when you're a beginner. Yet, the text provides these beautiful, grounding examples. It says, for example, when you see the sky, you can think, the sky is blue today. When you feel hungry, you can think, I want to eat something.
It's about direct association.
Now, looking at this, I have to ask, why is the text so hostile to translation? If I speak Spanish and I see the sky, my brain naturally thinks azul. Why is it so inherently damaging to just let my brain think azul, translate that to blue, and then speak? Well, what is the actual danger there?
The danger is latency, cognitive delay. Let's break down the mechanics of the translation trap you just described. If you rely on translation every single time you want to participate in a conversation, your brain has to execute a grueling, multi-step process. First, you receive the auditory input. Second, you translate that input into your native language to understand it. Third, you formulate your response in your native language. Fourth, you search your mental dictionary for the foreign equivalents of those words. Fifth, you apply the foreign grammatical rules to those words. And finally, sixth, you articulate the sentence.
That sounds exhausting. Just hearing the steps makes me tired.
It is exhausting. And more importantly, that 6-step process takes time. It takes milliseconds, sometimes entire seconds. That latency is the hesitation gap. That is why you are standing there staring blankly while the other person waits for an answer.
You're running the 6-step program in your head.
By forcing yourself to think in English, by looking at the sky and demanding your brain bypass the native word and directly access the concept of blue, you are eliminating the middleman. You are cutting the 6-step process down to a 2-step process. Ideate the thought. Articulate the thought.
You are building a direct neural highway between the visual stimulus of the sky and the English word, rather than taking the detour through your native language.
Precisely. The text explicitly notes that this habit trains your brain to process English naturally. It drastically reduces the cognitive load, which in turn drastically reduces the hesitation. You stop treating the language as a code that needs to be decrypted and start treating it as a direct expression of your reality.
It's the difference between navigating a city by constantly staring at a map versus just knowing the route because you've driven it 100 times. You want the language to be the territory, not the map.
Beautifully put.
Now, all these techniques, shadowing, thinking directly in the language, are very solitary pursuits. But the text eventually pushes the learner back out into the real world. It highlights the immense value of the feedback loop, stating that practicing with a partner is crucial because asking and answering questions creates a real conversation environment.
Because a solo environment is, by definition, a controlled environment. You are in charge of the pacing and the variables. A partner introduces chaos.
The good chaos.
A partner introduces unpredictability. When you speak with a human being, you have to dynamically react to their tone, their unexpected vocabulary choices, and their pace. It forces all those isolated skills you've been practicing to synthesize in real time under pressure. Furthermore, the text mentions that partners can correct mistakes gently. That external, gentle correction is vital to prevent a learner from permanently cementing incorrect grammatical structures or poor pronunciation into their muscle memory.
But the author also recognizes that not everyone is a native speaker sitting in their living room ready to practice. The text heavily advocates for leaning on modern tools. It mentions mobile apps, online courses, and watching videos with subtitles, which allows you to visually map the spoken audio to the written words simultaneously.
All great tools.
However, buried in this section about tools is one specific technique that I found simultaneously brilliant and absolutely terrifying.
What?
The text suggests that the learner should build a habit of recording themselves speaking.
Oh, yes. It is a universally dreaded exercise, regardless of whether you are learning a language, practicing a speech, or learning an instrument. Confronting a recording of yourself is inherently uncomfortable.
Oh, it's the worst. Everyone despises the sound of their own voice on tape. Why is the author forcing this kind of psychological torture on a beginner?
Because it forces an encounter with objective reality. When we speak, our perception of our own voice is severely distorted. We hear the sound vibrating through the bones in our skull, which makes our voice sound deeper, more resonant, and often much more accurate than it actually is.
It's an acoustic illusion.
The cognitive bias is very strong. We think we sound like the native speakers we've been shadowing. The recording strips away that bone conduction illusion. The text states, when you record your voice, you can listen to your pronunciation and identify areas for improvement.
So it's about breaking delusion. You have to hear the awkward pauses, the mispronounced vowels, the robotic cadence.
Exactly. You become your own auditor. You might be convinced you are pronouncing the TH sound perfectly, but the recording reveals you are actually saying a D sound. It is an uncomfortable but radically necessary tool for self-correction. As the text notes, it builds acute self-awareness of exactly how you are currently performing, which is the only baseline from which you can actually improve.
It's the linguistic equivalent of an athlete watching game tape to fix their throwing mechanics.
You can't fix a flaw you refuse to look at.
Okay, so we have the stepping stones, we have the active techniques, we are shadowing, we are banishing the translation trap, we are enduring the horror of our own voice memos. We are finally arriving at the fourth and final section of this deep dive. And Arguably, this is the linchpin of the entire framework.
The psychology.
Section 4 addresses the psychology of consistency and overcoming fear. Because let's be honest, you can have the best techniques in the world, but if your psychological approach is flawed, you will inevitably burn out and quit. The author drops a massive, counterintuitive rule right at the top of this section, the 15-minute rule.
This rule directly assaults the traditional academic model of studying that most of us were raised with. The text boldly asserts consistency is more important than long study sessions. It goes on to specifically prescribe practicing for 15 to 20 minutes every day, claiming this is vastly more effective than studying for several hours once a week.
Let's do the math on that because it feels wrong. If I study 15 minutes a day, 7 days a week, that's an hour and 45 minutes of total practice time. If I lock myself in a room on Sunday and cram for 3 straight hours, I'm putting in almost double the total time. How can the author logically argue that the shorter duration yields a better result?
It comes down to how the human brain actually consolidates memory and builds new neural architecture. The brain does not respond well to massive, infrequent floods of data. If you study for 3 hours on a Sunday, you overload the hippocampus. It simply cannot process, categorize, and store all of those new vocabulary words and grammar rules in one sitting.
So the bucket just overflows.
The majority of that data will spill over and be forgotten by Monday morning. Furthermore, by Wednesday or Thursday, the neural pathways you did manage to create will have significantly degraded because they haven't been reactivated.
So the 3-hour binge is mostly wasted effort.
It's highly inefficient. The text explains the underlying mechanism perfectly. Daily exposure keeps the language fresh in your mind and helps you remember vocabulary better. This is the principle of spaced repetition. By engaging with the language for just 15 minutes every single day, you are repeatedly sending a signal to your brain that this specific information is critical for your daily functioning.
Use it or lose it.
Frequent activation forces the brain to myelinate those specific neural pathways, making them stronger, faster, and more permanent. The consistency triggers the biological process of long-term memory consolidation, much of which actually happens while you sleep between those daily sessions.
It's the difference between watering a houseplant with a few ounces of water every single morning versus dumping a massive 5-gallon bucket of water on it once a month. The volume of water in the bucket is higher, but the plant will drown and then dry out and die. The consistency is the actual mechanism of growth.
Perfectly said.
But here's the catch. To maintain that 50-minute daily habit, a learner has to confront and overcome a massive, looming psychological hurdle. The text identifies it bluntly, the fear of making mistakes. It notes that many people worry about using the wrong grammar or mispronouncing words, and that this worry can completely paralyze their progress.
This is the deepest psychological barrier in any form of skill acquisition, not just language. From a very young age, our educational systems and social structures condition us to view mistakes as catastrophic failures. A mistake is a red X on a test. It's evidence of incompetence. It's a reason for peers to laugh at you. The ego develops a highly reactive defense mechanism to protect us from looking foolish in front of the tribe.
It's self-preservation.
But the author introduces a radical reframing of this concept. The text offers a crucial psychological intervention. Mistakes are a natural part of learning. Every mistake is an opportunity to improve.
Every mistake is an opportunity to improve. It sounds like a motivational poster, but in this context, it's actually an operational instruction.
It is an absolute requirement for fluency. You have to dismantle the ego's defense mechanism. The author goes further to normalize this reality by pointing out that even fluent speakers sometimes make mistakes. This is meant to destroy the learner's illusion that perfection is the baseline. If a beginner sets flawless grammar as the prerequisite for opening their mouth, they will remain silent forever because perfection is biologically impossible at that stage. The text is urging the learner to understand the true ultimate goal.
Which is?
The goal of spoken language is not grammatical perfection. The goal is the successful transfer of meaning.
If I use the completely wrong past tense verb and I mangle the pronunciation, but the shopkeeper still understands that I want to buy the water, the communication was successful.
Exactly. The transaction was completed. The mistake wasn't a failure. It was simply a data point. It revealed a gap in your mapping that you can now observe and correct. If you hide from the mistakes, you hide from the data required to improve. You have to willingly subject yourself to looking foolish. You have to embrace the clumsiness of the beginner if you ever want to achieve the grace of the expert.
It requires a profound level of humility. And that humility must be paired with enormous patience. which is the next concept the text emphasizes. It delivers a sobering, yet deeply encouraging reality check. Improvement does not happen overnight.
It's managing expectations. The author is validating the agonizing friction of the early stages. The text acknowledges that at first, you may struggle to find the right words, you may speak slowly or make mistakes. This validation is critical for the learner's mental endurance. When they are struggling to remember the word for breakfast on week 2, they need to know that this struggle is not a symptom of their own inherent inadequacy.
It's just the process.
It is simply the mandatory terrain that every learner must cross. But the author immediately anchors that struggle to the inevitable reward. But with regular practice, your confidence and fluency will grow. Every conversation brings you closer to your goal.
And what exactly is that ultimate goal? As the source material comes to a close, it pans the camera out beautifully. We spent all this time focused on the micromechanics shadowing audio tracks, memorizing irregular verbs, describing eggs and toast, asking where the bus stop is. But the text pulls back to reveal the macro impact. It states, learning English opens many opportunities in life. It breaks out of the narrow view of language as an academic chore.
It reframes the language entirely. It is no longer just a subject to be studied, it is a skeleton key that unlocks reality. The text enumerates these vast, life-altering benefits, noting that it allows you to communicate with people from different countries, travel more easily, and access global information. It highlights its critical role in business, education, and technology. By placing these massive intrinsic rewards at the end of the text, the author is providing the psychological fuel required to sustain that grinding 15-minute daily habit.
You need that why.
When you are sitting alone in your room, exhausted, recording your own voice and confronting your mistakes, you aren't just practicing a verb conjugation, you are systematically dismantling the geographic and cultural walls that confine your life.
Daily English conversation practice is not just about learning a language. It is about building confidence, connecting with people, and expanding your world. That summary line from the text itself is incredibly potent. It brings the entire exhaustive process full circle.
It perfectly maps the transformation the author is promising. The text guarantees that this daily practice transforms beginners into confident speakers. It assures the learner that the paralyzing fear will eventually dissipate, the vocabulary will naturally compound, and those agonizingly deliberate, clumsy conversations will eventually become fluid and unconscious. It stands as a testament to the compounding power of consistent, incremental, fearless effort.
So let's pull all of these threads together and recap the massive journey we've taken through this deep dive. We started by confronting the reality of the hesitation gap, that frustrating canyon, between knowing the theory of a skill and actually executing it under pressure. We realized that memorizing the physics of a bicycle will never teach your body how to balance, and that the only way to learn is to get on the saddle and pedal, regardless of how wobbly you are. We mapped out the stepping stones, discovering how the most mundane topics imaginable, deploying prepackaged greetings, reciting your morning routine, anchoring irregular verbs to your breakfast, are actually highly sophisticated tools for hacking your brain's retrieval system and building the architecture of fluency without triggering an anxiety response.
We dissected the active techniques the author provided. We looked at how analytical listening allows you to observe the structural rhythm of the language, and how the aggressive, immediate mimicry of the shadowing technique forces your physical muscles to adapt while bypassing the over-analytical brain. We explored the critical necessity of escaping the translation trap, cutting out the cognitive latency by building direct neural pathways between the concept and the target language. We discussed the unpredictability of partner practice and the uncomfortable but utterly vital necessity of confronting objective reality by recording your own voice.
And finally, we unpacked the psychological resilience required to make any of this work. We broke down the neurology behind the 15-minute rule, proving that daily, consistent exposure builds stronger neural pathways than hours of sporadic cramming. We fundamentally reframed the concept of mistakes, viewing them not as catastrophic failures that wound our ego, but as essential, neutral data points required for course correction. And we reminded ourselves of the patience required to endure the clumsy beginner phase in order to eventually unlock a vastly expanded, interconnected world. The framework is clear. Lower the stakes, build the daily habit, embrace the mistakes, and the fluency will inevitably follow.
Ultimately, the source material serves as an engine of empowerment. It takes the overwhelming, monolithic mountain of mastering a new language, demystifies it, and breaks it down into a sequence of actionable, daily, and highly achievable behavioral habits.
It truly is a masterclass in the psychology of skill acquisition. Now, as we wrap up this incredibly deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. It's inspired by our deep dive into the translation trap and the text's forceful advice to think directly in the new language, to look at the sky and instinctively generate the new word, completely bypassing your native tongue. If you train your brain to do that, if you successfully rewire your neural pathways to process information and conceptualize reality directly through the vocabulary and syntax of a completely different culture, it raises a profound, almost philosophical question. How might learning a new language actually change the core of who you are and how you perceive reality?
It's a huge question.
Think about that for a second. If you aren't just translating words, but actually adopting a new structural framework for thought, does it alter your personality? Do you become a slightly different version of yourself when you speak it? I invite you to experiment with this tomorrow. As you go through your perfectly mundane morning routine, as you brush your teeth and eat your breakfast, try to experience those deeply familiar moments entirely through the lens of whatever new skill or language you are trying to master. How does it change the emotional resonance of the routine? How does it recontextualize the objects sitting on your desk? It is a deeply fascinating concept to explore on your own. Really powerful stuff. Thank you so much for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the foundations of daily practice and the hidden mechanics of skill acquisition. We hope this breakdown has given you the clarity and the psychological tools to overcome your own hesitation gap. So get out there, embrace the awkwardness, get on the bicycle, and start pedaling. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning the mechanics of how you learn, and absolutely do not be afraid to make a massive mess of mistakes along the way.